You're listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
I wanna see the light.
All right, and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for letting us be part of your day. We are sitting here live on a Thursday night where we are, where you are. It might not be Thursday night. It might be Friday morning. It might, whenever you listen to this, right?
Right.
For all the new folks who are continually joining us, we certainly appreciate you, mostly because the regular listeners are hitting those likes and share buttons and letting you know that we're here. My name is Sherry Mitchell. Sitting next to me is the only person in the entire world with the fortitude to be able to put up with me for 30 years. The lovely Myra.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Actually, it has been about 30 years because it was in March 30 years ago that
You proposed.
I proposed, yes. And just a couple of months later, we got married, and you've been there ever since. And how you stood up, how you've been able to accomplish that, I don't know. But, you know, I'm kind of glad you did.
Patience.
Patience? Patience. Oh, my.
Understanding? Understanding. That's more like it, maybe.
Well, you were either brave enough or crazy enough to stick with it, so
Right.
one or the other. All right. Before I'm going to give you this warning before we talk about what I'm going to talk about first. I'm going to get into a little bit of the timeline of the Exodus, but before I do that, something you need to be aware of, and it might, you know, when I read this, I was upset. No, that's not the right word. I was not angry. I was not really upset. It caused me to have one of those moments of what is going on. And I saw this, and it comes from Brett Bart. It's an article that was written by Penny Starr. I'm not going to read all of it. And it starts out. Let me just read the first paragraph, and then a statement from someone else. The Massachusetts city of Cambridge has put in place a measure that recognizes domestic partnerships of more than two people, euphemistically referred to a polyamorous family, which in practice means sexual relationships between multiple adults in one household. Okay? Are you surprised yet? I am not. In a statement from the American Family Association, the AFA predicted this decades ago. Ed Vitagliano, and if I messed that name up, I apologize, who is the executive vice president of the American Family Association, said in a statement issued to the press, once you reject the biblical model for human sexuality, marriage, and family, when it comes to homosexuality, there is no logical stopping place. Polygamy and polyamory are acceptable, he said in that statement. This return to pagan sexuality began with a rejection of God and His Word. Unfortunately for the people of Massachusetts, and eventually the people of this nation, paganism leads to barbarism. Now, while the American Family Association believes that marriage is between one man and one woman, that's not exactly biblically accurate. but it's close. They are on track. That this civil policy is a slap in the face of the Creator and the university. I'm sorry. This policy, I'm going to read what I got here. The policy is a direct slap in the face to the Creator. Okay. Hi, Carol. Glad to see you.
Hi, Carol.
And really, marriage is not about sex. Okay, folks, just get over it. It's not about sex. It's about raising a family and taking care of the community, the widows and the orphans. That's what marriage is about. That's why there's provisions in Scripture where if you are able to care for someone, you do so. Why do you think David had so many wives? He was the king. He was in a position to marry those people, those widows, because in the instructions it says if a woman is widowed with no children, she needs to find someone, and I know it says brother in the English translations, but actually it's a countryman who is able to marry her and care for her in her own home. You don't bring them you don't bring two women to the same house. Even the good Lord understands you can't do that. Okay, they'll kill each other. Yeah, yes. You keep them in their own homes, but you attempt to provide security for her in the form of a family, children, offspring. Right? That was accomplished through marriage many years ago. Other traditions have taken place that we don't do that anymore. But that was the provision. What it was there for was to make sure that these widows were cared for. What it was there for was to make sure that these children had somewhere to go. Even, if children were orphaned, you were to take them in if you were able. And a lot of times, people who were not blessed with having their own natural children would take these orphans in and raise them as their own. What's going on here, and Cambridge and Boston are separated by, I think it's the Charles River in Massachusetts. And hey Jay, glad to see you. And I have seen,
hi Jay.
I have spoken with, I guess the best thing I can call them is refugees from that area. And they have told me in the past that whatever happens in the Boston-Cambridge area, Massachusetts soon follows, and the Northeast soon follows. So make sure you're aware that this is going to be coming at you. You're going to see now, this polyamorous family that they're talking about here is not always, what's the word? They're not always mixed genders, is the polite way to say it. They're not of all sexes. Sometimes they're all homosexual relationships that they're talking about. And there is no maximum limit. Okay? You can have as many as you want under these policies. Now, it takes a state to change the requirements of marriage. Right? Because, and this is just a policy recognizing it by a city. There's a difference there, and there's a reason there's a difference there. Is because the whole state's not quite ready for it yet, but it won't be long. Give it a year or two, you will see this happen. We've already talked about marriage a couple of times in the last, year, and how people are marrying robots, and the one lady that chose to marry the spirit of a dead pirate, and then he cheated on her. And she decided she wanted a divorce after that. So it's, this stuff's out there. It shouldn't be any surprise, but just be prepared for it. Here's the way I want to present this. There's not going to be a whole lot of people that are standing up against this. So you need to make sure, if you want to make people aware of how they can survive what's going on around them, You're not going to defeat it. Guarantee you're not going to defeat this. It's too late in the game now, and the enemy really has a stronghold here. But what we can do is learn how to live in such a way that we can not be, we don't have to surrender to it. Let's just put it that way. When we learn to follow the instructions, we don't have to surrender to that. And the way you do that is to, you close up the ranks, right? There's two easy ways to do that. One is you hit your knees and you pray. The other way is you make sure that people like me who are getting this message out to you about this kind of stuff have the platform and the ability to do that. And you do that by the share buttons, the like buttons. If you go to Give God 90, there's a really neat little button that I don't talk about much called the support button. You can hit that support button, and that gives us the opportunity then to keep this going and make sure that you're aware of what's happening out there with these kind of things. Because these are attacks, not just against Jews and Christians. These are attacks against the Almighty himself. These are direct attacks against anyone who believes that the Almighty is still in control, because they're doing everything they can to stand against him. And there's only spiritually speaking, there's very few ways to stand against this stuff. But the best way to do it is exactly what I have been talking about for the last few years, and that is following the Creator's instructions. Because when you live the way you're designed to live, it solves a lot of problems. Right?
It does.
Okay. So, we have a interesting spring celebration coming up in a couple of days. Passover this year is, for the people in the United States, Saturday the 27th, beginning at sundown. And if that is when whatever calendar you're following says it is, but that's when we're going to celebrate here, because it makes the most sense. The barley's of Eve, more on that in a minute. And it's time. So we're going to do that. And what I was looking at this year was kind of a timeline, because Passover is just a meal. It's eaten from the time that the sun goes down till it's dark, and then it's over. But it ushers in this weird thing called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's a 7-day period where you don't eat anything with leaven in it. You don't eat anything that would cause the dough to rise in a pastry type thing. And as we get into this, actually we did get into that pretty good on Monday, right? Okay,
yes.
So we've covered all of that. So as we get into what I'm looking at, what I got curious about is, well, where were they on the seventh day? They leave Israel, and it took them a longer time than it should have taken them to get to Mount Sinai. So somewhere along the way, this feast ended, and there's nothing in Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, or Deuteronomy to tell you where they were. But can we figure out where they were? Well, maybe. Let's take a look. Now, when we try to find exact times in the Bible, we get caught up in one of the problems is, what calendar do we use? Because they weren't using, January, February, March. That was different, right? Back then, there was lots of different calendars, kind of like there is today when you look at the Messianic and Hebrew roots and Jewish movements, right? Everybody's got their own calendar that they're using because everybody thinks the other people are wrong, or the other people are crazy, or the other people, oh, you can't do it like that. No, that's not how they did it. Well, you can work that out in fear and trembling. What I'm saying is nothing's changed in about 36 or 3,700 years. It seems it's just getting crazier and crazier. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 2, we read, "This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you." Now, in the next chapter, in Exodus 13, 3 and 4, Moses said to the people, "Remember this day which you came out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of hand the Lord brought you out from this place, and there shall no leavened bread be eaten. This day you came out in the month of Aviv." Now, what is this month of Aviv? When the barley was at a certain stage of ripeness called Aviv. Barley ripens in the spring. So we determine then, based on the sighting of the new moon and the ripeness being in a certain stage of barley, I believe Aviv is, when you look at the head of the barley, you take one seed out of the head, and it has to be hard enough to be firm, but you can still kind of push a fingernail in it. It's not dry, because if it was dry, it would be too late. The hail and this wind would destroy the crop. You want it to be just at that stage where it's just prior to being ripe. That's what Aviv is. Now, understand something else. The first time this happened, they weren't in Israel. The first time this happened, they were in Egypt, specifically in the land of Goshen near the city of Ramesses. Okay? So that's when all of this takes place in the spring of the year. They're told, here's what you look for, here's what you're going to see, here's what you're going to do. But we don't really get a good, I don't want to say day-by-day account, because there is no good day-by-day account. But we get a listed out account in Numbers chapter 33. If you want to read verses 1 through 8 of that, we'll see if we can figure out where they were.
These are the places the Israelites went as Moses and Aaron led them out of Egypt in divisions. At the Lord's command, Moses recorded the places they went. These were the places they went. On the 15th day of the month, they left Ramesses. That was the day after the Passover. The Israelites marched out boldly in front of all the Egyptians. The Egyptians were burying their firstborn sons. The Lord had killed them. He showed the gods of Egypt were false. The Israelites left Ramesses and camped in Sukkot. They left Sukkot and camped in Etam. It was at the edge of the desert. They left Etam and went back to Pihar-Keret. This was east of Baal-Zephon. They camped near Migdal. They left Pihar-Kerot. They walked through the sea into the desert. After 3 days through the desert of Etam, they camped in Marah.
Okay. Aren't you glad I gave you all those fun names to pronounce?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Everybody likes those names. Here's the thing. We can look at this and we can start counting, okay? And we know that the day after the Passover, on the 15th day, they left where they were in the land of Goshen near Ramses, and they went to Sukkot. And, from there you count it out. And if you think about 7 days, this should be very close to where they were, that place of Marah, or Mara, however you want to say it, where they found the bitter water. Okay? But does what Moses write here agree with what he wrote earlier? Carol says you did a good job.
Thanks, Carol.
She tries. She does. She tries. She does good. When Moses wrote earlier, it's not as succinct. You have to kind of look. You have to kind of really dig a little bit. Here's the thing. In Exodus 13, Moses writes that they left Sukkot, but that's not where they started from. He doesn't begin, he's like, well, everybody knew where we left from. I don't have to tell them that again. So in Exodus 13, sometimes people miss that starting point. You have to begin where you are. You can't begin from someplace else, right? If I'm going to take a trip and I'm going to go from New York to L.A., and I don't live in New York, I've got to get there first. So you have to go there. But in Exodus 13, Moses starts that they left from Sukkot. And it's not a long journey, according to the map. I mean, if you look at a map, you can see where these things are. And, remember, we're not talking about going from the heart of one city to the heart of another city. Okay? It's a general location. If somebody tells you they're going to New York, that can mean a couple of different things. New York's a big place. It's a state, and it's a city named the same as the state, right? And even in the city, there's different boroughs of New York. There's Brooklyn and Manhattan and Long Island, and a couple more that I can't remember off the top of my head. That's terrible, but all the New York folks can correct me later. And also remember that when you're traveling with this many people, it looks like an invading army, right?
Right.
Now, you don't just roll up to the gates of a city with probably close to 1 million people and a bunch of animals and knock on the gate and say, we need a room for the night. That's just not going to happen. You would stop out away from the city, and 1 or 2 people would go up and say, don't worry, we're camped out here. It's okay. Tomorrow we'll be gone. We'll clean up, take everything with us, we'll be gone. That's called etiquette. And there was a lot of etiquette used in the ancient times, and most of it has survived today. The people that I have talked to that actually live in the Middle East will say that, if you see somebody and you wave and they wave back, they're probably supposed to be there, right? They're not sneaking around doing something they shouldn't be doing. But if you see somebody and they're trying to avoid you, well, something suspicious is going on. You need to check that out. It's called being courteous. When we lived in Colorado, if you see somebody, you wave and they wave back, everything's usually pretty good. If they don't wave back, something's going on, right? Mm-hmm, right. That's just, either they didn't live there, they're from the city, right. Something was happening. They probably shouldn't have been where they were. Now, even from Sukkot to Etam, and then they turn and head toward Pihahirot, which is an area. It's a large area. It would be kind of like saying they went to New York, but then when they say they camped between Migdal and the sea, that's a little more specific. It gets them into that Nueve area, okay, where the beach widens out. Now, here is a good place to kind of stop for a moment and think about the way they were traveling. When there were so many people and so many animals, and they're walking on a trail where it's not paved, it's probably not even rock, right? It raises some dust. You can't take that many people and move them more than about 10 feet without creating a dust.
Right.
One of the things that I used to do when we were in Colorado, we would herd cattle, right? If it's a dry part of the season, even in the mountains, it didn't matter whether you had 10 or 15 or whether you had 200 or whether you had 2,000. If you were moving cattle, it was dusty because they would string out and that dust would raise. And if it was windy, that dust would get everywhere.
Yes.
It was just say it was dusty. Dust got places you didn't know you had places. When you started, you just wanted a shower by the end of the day, right? When another good example of this is when we were in the Little Bighorn Battleground Memorial. You look across the plains from that memorial, and I can tell you, the couple of hundred men that Custer had, the Indians knew he was coming for 3 days.
At least.
I guarantee it. You can see that far, and no matter which direction he would have approached that particular little area, that Little Bighorn area, you could see. That was high ground. They had the high ground, and they knew what was coming. That was not a surprise attack by any stretch of the imagination. All of his military training did him absolutely no good when you're trying to sneak up on somebody and you can't be, they just could not be snuck up on.
No.
It's just the way things are. You don't move that many people without creating dust.
Right.
Now, they had something else that was kind of like a big flashing neon sign, right? If you look at Exodus 13, 21, and 22, if you want to read those two verses.
And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them the way, and by night a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people.
Okay. So here is this great big huge neon sign, right? And basically it's a warning sign that says, "Leave my people alone." Pharaoh didn't listen. He didn't learn. He sent the Egyptian army after them, but when the army actually reached the pass at the end of the wadi there in that area of Pihakirot, it was looking over Nuevo Beach, the pillar stopped them. It got between the Egyptian army and that mixed multitude that came out of Egypt. And it stopped that army long enough for Moses to stretch that rod out across the sea, at arm's length, okay, while the wind blew, and create a passage where the people could walk across on dry land. They walked across into Saudi Arabia, the land of Midian. And they stood there and looked back as that pillar and that of cloud lifted and let the Egyptian army come down onto the beach and begin into that dry land. And they probably didn't know what to expect. They were probably sitting there going, "Moses, you got us this far. God's got us this far. Are we going to die here in Midian?" And all of a sudden, the wind stopped and the water went back to where it was supposed to be. They watched as basically that water swept over the men and the horses, the chariots, whatever they had with them. And they were so overjoyed, overtaken, that they basically just cheered and praised the Almighty. If you look at Exodus, I believe it's beginning of Exodus 15 is where that song is that Miriam begins to sing about the horse and the rider thrown into the sea. That was an amazing feat. And isn't it amazing that when we read that in Numbers, let me go back up here a minute in my notes, and it just simply says, they left Pi-ha-Kirot and walked through the sea into the desert. Moses is like, no big deal. No big deal. Nothing to see here, right?
Keep it moving.
So, again, this suggests that about day 3 or 4 would have been when the crossing the sea was. And day 7 would have put them about at the area of Marah where the bitter water was. That's when the Feast of Unleavened Bread would have been over, right?
Right.
Okay. Here's a little bit of speculation. We need to calculate based on a couple of things. Moses is writing in Exodus and Numbers, and he's writing this after the fact. He's writing this probably, most likely, and I'm quite certain, after the visit on Mount Sinai. The visit from the Almighty on Mount Sinai. Okay? What Moses is writing to us here is all this happened. He's writing it like it happened yesterday, but it was a few weeks for him. And we're trying to make sense of it 3,600 years later because we look back and see things. And one of the things that I have to wonder is if he didn't initiate putting this Feast of Unleavened Bread here based on a couple of things. He knew it after the fact. Did they really know it that day? Traveling with matzah, traveling with crackers is not the easiest thing in the world. Traveling with risen bread's a lot easier, right?
Right.
If you take that many people and you give them a cracker to carry, they're going to have crumbs by the time they get where they're going. Mm-hmm. It's just that simple. Anybody who's ever had a piece of matzah in their hand knows how crumbly it is. So did they really do that? We don't absolutely know for sure. We know what Moses has written, but again, he's writing it after everything he knows. Moses fails to mention that they would have stopped to observe the Sabbath, which is kind of odd, right? What's the first command for the Feast of Unleavened Bread? It will be a Sabbath day for you. Don't do anything. Why were they traveling? Well, they had to get out of Egypt. So was that instruction for unleavened bread given to them at that day? We know that the instruction for the lamb was. We know the instruction for the blood over the doorpost was. We know all of that was because that's the only way that it could have happened. But it's almost written as if unleavened bread was an afterthought, sorta, kinda. Because you don't really want to travel with it. It's not that much lighter than regular bread. It's more trouble. And it's not really wholesome and filling. So, what's the deal here, Moses? Give us, throw us a bone, right? That's the saying today. You got give us something to we can see. Give us something to think about. Moses has a tendency to put things in other places that might lead me to the speculation. Okay, if we look at Genesis 2. Thus the heavens and earth were finished, and the host of them, and on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and had made. Now verse 3 is written almost as an afterthought. It's there in the original. We know that Moses wrote that and put it there, but again, he's writing this after everything had happened. He's going back and he's thinking, remember the Sabbath day when the Almighty came down on the mountain and said, don't have any gods before me, don't bow to anybody else, don't bow to any idols. By the way, here's the biggie, remember the Sabbath. Make sure you remember the Sabbath. In fact, it's such an often repeated command in Scripture, It's the most repeated command in Scripture. Okay? Moses is writing Genesis, and he gets to the seventh day, and he says, I got to say something special about it. Now, I can't let this pass. But prior to Mount Sinai, there's not a whole lot written about Sabbath, except in these passing general contexts, right? So why do we wonder when things happen in the Bible? You know, did the mixed multitude run out of unleavened bread at the bitter waters of Marah? Maybe. Does it really change the narrative? No, it doesn't. Doesn't change a thing. Why doesn't it change anything? Because they hadn't reached their destination, right? So it doesn't really matter when they ran out or if they took any with them. Here's what difference it would make. The Feast of Unleavened Bread means more than just leaving Egypt. The Feast of Unleavened, that 7 days where you don't eat risen pastry, for lack of a better word, whether it's bread or cake or whatever else it might be, is something bigger than just remembering a journey out of Egypt. With the information I have right now, I really do think there are many, many, many lessons to be found in that 7 days of not eating leaven. Whether you think about the 7 days of creation, whether you think about, pick a topic, it's probably going to cover it. And there's probably many that we haven't realized yet. There's lessons in there about dietary, spiritual things. There's lessons in there about all kinds of things. And I bet if we really stop to think about it, there are lessons in there that will point to probably the Messiah, right? 7 days of eating unleavened bread after the Passover meal. It's not about, or I should say, it's not just about a walk from Ramses through the Red Sea on dry land and winding up somewhere. There's more to it. I think there's a lot more to it. I'm not going to get into a lot of lessons because I'm running out of time. I don't want to take up a whole lot more time. But I can say this for absolute certain. If we fail to observe the instructions that were given by the Almighty, we will never know the reason behind them. We will never understand why they were given. And we will never comprehend the fullness of blessings that He wants to give us. Right? If you want to have that kind of a relationship with the Creator, we need to claim that we are living according to His instructions. We're living the way He designed us. If we want that closeness, that binding relationship, that same relationship you would have maybe with your spouse. You're not going to, hopefully you're not going to take your wedding vows and say, I promise to do, X, Y, and Z, whatever it happens to be, and then the next day turn around and do something completely different. That's the golden calf incident, right?
Right.
They violated the covenant. You violate your wedding vows, what's your spouse going to do to you? I know what mine would have done to me, and probably would still. Right?
Sure would.
Yeah, I would not be as handsome and chipper as I am right now because you'd beat me to death.
See right through you.
Uh-huh. That too. So, the Almighty's not that drastic. When the golden calf occurred and they violated the covenant with him, he said, okay, I'm going to force you to remember this. And he introduced a sacrificial system that was a constant reminder that you messed up. Wait a minute. Today they call that alimony, right? Every time you have to write that alimony check, it's a constant reminder you messed up. Yeah, I went there. Okay. It might not work in every country in the world. Trust me, in the United States, it's going to work. But that's the way you need to think about this. If you think that you want that relationship, then you need to be doing the things he asks you to do. And it's very, very simple to live the way you're designed to live. It's not difficult. It's not rocket science. But part of that, what we do is we remember these celebrations, remember these feasts. You can't keep them exactly. You know, there are some years that Messianic Delaware gets together and we do a traditional Seder. There are some years we've gotten together and we'll have a meal, we'll tell the story, in a different way, which is what we're going to do this year. And this year, we're going a little bit farther. We're saying, instead of a traditional Seder meal, we're going to have Passover from around the world, where we are going to introduce, everybody kind of picks whatever nation, country, time period they want, and then it's all going to come together in kind of like a potluck, and we'll see what we get. Yes. Right? It's going to be fun. That's the kind of celebration that you do because you want to come together, but the big reason you come together is to tell the story, to show the lessons, to say, here is how the Almighty brought his chosen people out from a place in such a way that there was no mistaking who did it. There was no mistaking that it could have been done any other way. He does this not only to show his glory, but he does this so that we remember. And we remember to tell our children, so that when they tell the story, they remember, and they remember to tell their children, and it just keeps going. So no matter what you do to celebrate, the one thing you have to do is tell the story, right?
Right. Again and again.
Again and again and again and again.
Don't add to it, and don't take away from it.
Well, we can speculate a little bit in there. But seriously, was it, does it matter where they were on a certain day throughout their journey? Not really, because what we have is a roadmap of the journey.
Right.
We don't have the hotel receipts where they stopped and stayed in a hotel. It wasn't a tax deduction thing. This was more important. The journey itself was an experience that they needed, and we need to remember that. Because when we see their journey, we might see a little bit of the journey of our life in it as well. Hopefully, that gives you something to think about as you celebrate Passover this week, or whenever you celebrate it. Whenever you listen to this, it might be afterwards when you do. And that's okay. Just don't forget to celebrate. Tell the story. And it's more so, it's not just there were some slaves in Egypt and they got out. Okay? Why were they there? Who brought them out? Moses might have been leading the way, but he couldn't have done it by himself. So, as you mention those lessons, put the names where the names belong, right?
Right.
Information is important. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Happy Passover, everyone.
Absolutely, everyone. I hope you have an enjoyable celebration, and we will talk to everyone. It's kind of hard to say we'll see you because we're not doing video anymore.
Right.
But we will talk to everyone Monday morning, bright and early at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Till next week. Many, many blessings, everyone.